Hi, my name is Tim Powell. I work at the Virginia Department of Health as an epidemiologist and an informatician. My title at the Department of Health is the Director of Public Health Informatics. This is actually a new role that the Virginia Department of Health has introduced because health informatics is really becoming the wave of the future. Everything we do is based on data. And so Virginia has committed to the journey of becoming a data-driven organization, and the creation of the role that I now hold, it was deemed critical for us to achieve that. And so my informatics journey started many years ago as working as an applied epidemiologist, and realizing, as I was being asked to make decisions on the data, that the data itself wasn't of the quality to be able to make these informed decisions. So I started investing more of my time into trying to understand what could be done to improve the quality and the reliability of these data. And through that journey, I fell further and further into the role of an informatician. I was fortunate that nationally there's been a recognition of a need for people with an increased capability to work within the informatics space. And at the time, the Council for State and Territorial Epidemiologists provided funding for training, and I was able to receive a scholarship to go to the University of Illinois and get a graduate certificate in public health informatics, which is really both enabled me to have the skill sets to do this work, but also introduced me to peers in other jurisdictions, so that we've been able to create more of a community of peers working in this space to collectively elevate the concept of public health informatics, and bring attention to its need within the public health space. My vision for informatics really is to help public health start to align really with the use of data that's happened in the private sector for many years now. Data is viewed as, short of the people who are any company's most valuable asset, data is your second most important asset, because it allows you to make informed decisions. And so really helping our organization put the value behind the data that they do behind the people is really my vision. Creating access to data for those who need it when they need it, in the format that they need it as well, is critical. We're really at a tipping point moment where, for lots of years, the capacity hasn't existed just due to funding limitations, personnel limitations, any number of limitations. But nationally, the awareness has been created, and now receiving resources that are allowing us to start to create momentum behind these initiatives, not just at the state and jurisdictional level, but nationally, which is really helping tremendously allow us to really refine those visions that are out there, and start to move towards the creation of the actual infrastructure.
That's awesome. And I think it really segues nicely into some questions that we have for you. And kind of just trying to understand how you set the stage for population health informatics, public health informatics. Kind of sounds like the stage you're in a little bit right now, in terms of understanding the role that you play, the role within the agencies and the institutions, and how they build that network. You're saying, like, the network, you have individual peers within this community, but then also within the agencies and within the institutions as well, and understanding how data and information and knowledge get exchanged, and making sure that that there can be interoperability and the availability of data to flow in a safe and secure way, and how that leads into surveillance as well, and just the statistical issues that might pop up. So, Melissa, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. So for module 2 video is about setting the stage for population health informatics. And so the first question we have for you today is, how does VDH assess its capacity for health informatics and technology adoption?
That's a great question. Yeah, this is a process that we actually started a little while ago, and by that I mean a couple of years ago, because while the concept of population health or public health informatics has been one that's been out in the community, it's not necessarily been a well understood topic. So as it's being communicated to leadership, they may have a different understanding of the topic than you're intending to present to them. And so the work that's been done, not solely at VDH, but really, again, happening at these national levels to create the resources to standardize definitions and to create language that will help ensure that the concepts of informatics are heard and understood by these key decision makers. Because, I think you'll find a fairly general consensus across the public health space that informatics has really emerged out of the communicable disease surveillance section of public health, because that's really the area that's had the greatest emphasis on the systems and the standards that are necessary in order to ensure that you're able to compare data from across jurisdictions. So while this has happened in these much smaller sectors of public health, the awareness that for us to be able to get to this next phase of public health 3.0, and really that focus on comprehensive population health, it requires all of our systems to be configured appropriately to ultimately provide us with good data that can be transformed into meaningful information. So while this work has been happening, a lot of it's been happening with separate nonprofit organizations to compile all of this. And so one entity, the Public Health Informatics Institute, has really helped pave the way for a lot of this work, and provided the tools to individuals like myself that are operating at the jurisdictional level, and may not necessarily have the time to be able to create well-designed assessments. So they've provided a couple, one of which, as I mentioned, we had implemented back in 2018, which is they refer to as their informatics savvy health department assessment. So that's great. And it really looks at three primary areas, which is going to be the workforce, ensuring that you actually have people who know what this work is and how to perform it efficiently and effectively. It's then looking at the systems themselves to make sure that the systems have been designed in a manner so that they're interoperable with one another and with other states as well. And then thinking about the data itself, that what you're able to produce out of these then is also meeting your programmatic or agency needs. And so it was really helpful for us to be able to implement that and establish a baseline of maturity for the organization. And this is one of the nice things I like about these assessments, is that they're all focused on a maturity model. So, it's less of low scoring versus high scoring. It recognizes that everyone has an opportunity to improve upon where they're at. And so, being able to have a baseline assessment lets you know that you really have a low level of maturity for any one of the domains that are necessary to be a well-equipped or informatics savvy agency has been invaluable. That said, we're now looking at reconducting some of these assessments, because obviously things change over time. Organizationally, Virginia has changed since we last conducted that in 2018. So we're going to be redoing that assessment this year as we look towards the next phase of our strategic planning and for growth here. additional materials that they have, they've also recently introduced an interoperability assessment, which is going to be critical because, two of the kind of key tenets of informatics is integration and interoperability. So really looking at what we have from those systems perspectives and their ability to effectively work with one another. So those are some of the key areas that we're going to be conducting assessments in this year. And then going into probably later this year and into next year, there's been a large initiative at the national level to really put a spotlight on public health and the data contained within it. In fact, I think the tagline that they were using for this was data elemental for health. And Congress has, as of last year, appropriated funds to help promote data modernization across the public health sector. And one of the expectations there is that there will be robust evaluations that are conducted so that at that federal level, they have better information to guide requests for more money and to be able to measure how we're elevating the public health informatics infrastructure nationally. And so honestly, we're still waiting for some of those new assessment tools to be developed because while it was appropriated a year ago, most of public health has been overwhelmed in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, really starting to get our head above water again and looking towards leveraging both these new opportunities as well as the opportunities that the pandemic have provided us as a result of additional funding that we haven't necessarily had previously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. That makes me curious, about what COVID-19 has revealed in terms of the gaps or the needs, or even what you have good bones to your systems, and that could be expanded or built upon, right? And so, just in general, any specific techniques or tools that, say, in the last year, because of the pandemic, that VDH was able to generate different knowledge or new knowledge about population-based data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that within this past year, it's been less about necessarily new mechanisms. I mean, we absolutely have had to create new tools, essentially overnight in some instances, to help close those immediate gaps that existed. And those have been great, but I'm really looking towards this next phase as we're trying to slow down a little bit and have that opportunity to really conduct those comprehensive evaluations with, 5 years from now being the picture we're trying to paint at this point. Because I think these really rapid responses that had to happen in the past year, again, they were addressing pain points and not necessarily establishing those systems that are really going to meet our needs prospectively. And so coming back, looking at those integration opportunities so that we can help minimize our footprint and improve our capability to really manage what will become more robust systems as we move forward. I think it's been interesting to observe the evolution of these type of tools over this past year. I feel pretty confident that we've known that we've needed new resources for a long time, but the constraint of funding, has always sort of put us in a position of needing to plan for things, document what we want and not necessarily be able to act on it. And now we have the resources to be able to act on it, but not necessarily the warm bodies and time to be able to invest. And so as we're transitioning right now, really from that acute phase of the pandemic into this more longer term phase with less intensity associated with it, we're really starting to first take a deep breath and try to, just to mentally refocus, but then align all of our human resources behind these initiatives that we're going to be undertaking. So I think it really is, kind of like this seminal moment where we're like, the future is literally being defined right now. So it's really energizing, and I will say that. And it's not just a Virginia thing. It's not, it really is happening at this national level. And we're not alone in our position of going, what picture are we painting for the future? Because, fortunately, the CDC is creating a community around this under that data modernization umbrella that's been put out there, and allowing what previously might have been the one or two individuals from a jurisdiction who might have known each other to connect. They're allowing 10, 20 people from those jurisdictions to now come together and really form this this larger body that's able to start throwing more ideas in and really collaborating and helping identify appropriate solutions. That's one of the greatest fears, in all honesty, right now, is that when abundant resources are provided, it's too easy to essentially go on a shopping spree and just buy because it seems like a good idea. But we also have to really be looking forward at sustainability for these things as well. Because there's no value in building this, the biggest, shiniest, fanciest, thing you can build if you can't sustain it 3 years from now. Because that's something, and maybe that's a limitation of a long-term public health professional, is that I've been conditioned to the awareness that funding is not necessarily a linear thing. It tends to be provided in response to issues.
Or often a use it or lose it, right?
Precisely. And, and this is where I think the collective public health are really hoping that this, because funding that's been put out right now is viable through middle of 2023, which is great. That's longer than, frequently it's a 1-year type of cycle or something like that. And so this gives us a little longer, but as you're looking at really comprehensively evaluating the environment and then starting to build those solutions that are going to get us to that next state, that doesn't happen in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. It's really a much longer journey to get there.
Right.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, you've already spoke about this, but I'm going to ask it. It says, how do data modernization efforts guide VDH's interoperability and health information exchange to achieve population health management and improvement?
Yep. Yeah. So definitely data modernization is the buzzword right now, where I'm very used to using informatics, really starting to substitute that with data modernization. And that's important because it's being socialized as a key topic area, really from the top down. Again, CDC, a number of the other national organizations such as ASTO and NACCHO and CSTE, they're 100% behind it. So it's reaching the chief health officers. They are familiar with it, and so everything we do is starting to make sure that buzzword's in there, so they see the alignment internally with some of these national initiatives. That modernization is really both accelerating and opening up the opportunities for the improvements of the data transmissions and really interoperability of the data across the individual agency itself, but also the entirety of that public health continuum, because it is very hierarchical. Data for the most part is gathered at a local level in order to get the best sense of that local community, and in turn it's transmitted up the food chain to the federal level, where it's aggregated and presented in other manners for other stakeholders. So really thinking about how those pathways exist today and what they're evolving into for tomorrow. An example that I think is really relevant to look at and value the outcome, or I guess it's an outcome, it's a positive outcome of the pandemic, has been that electronic lab reporting was an initiative that was started, I think 12 years ago. And it's had varying levels of success as you look across the entirety of the United States at the different jurisdictions. In Virginia, we've had a lot of success with it. Pre-pandemic, we were receiving something like 95% of all lab reports via an electronic feed. Mm-hmm. This is huge because not only does it provide the data to public health faster, it also provides better information. It's standardized. You spend less time trying to get it into a usable state by multiple people. And that's great, but when we look at this window of time, that's a lot of years, and there are jurisdictions who are still under 70% for these type of labs. So that's a challenge. And as we're looking at this next phase where electronic case reporting, where we're connecting directly to the electronic health records or the medical record systems and getting those data directly to public health, that's a topic that has now been 5 years in discussion. And really, we didn't nationally see any traction yet. Within this last year, I would say, I think the stat at this point is something like 30% of health systems have connected and are now transmitting electronic case reports. And so that acceleration is just amazing. And it's really been facilitated by the recognition that these flows of data just were inferior. So additionally, what's occurring, and we actually had a discussion about this last night with the CDC and the United States Data Service, which is a brand new agency that is, as I understand it, made up of essentially fellow type of positions. So you're getting folks that are coming in from the private sector who are experts at all things technology that are looking to do very rapid development of new solutions and this is across the government space, but within the public health area, they're looking at improving data flows, to all levels. And so, it's really exciting and fascinating to see how this is shifting. We're starting to really think more comprehensively about that utilization of shared services, cloud-based shared services. Historically, it had very much been, everyone go off and create your own unique wheel that you're going to use with standards to be able to collect and then share information. And whereas now we're starting to finally think about, you don't have to have as many unique one-offs. We're able to look to these shared services, which in turn are going to accelerate the development cycle and improve the standards.
Are there any, because of kind of all this with the national level and just within Virginia, are there emerging sources of data that you are starting to see, or either by intention and purpose, or just kind of, oh, wow, we're getting this new pieces of information that we didn't have before?
I don't think it's changed that radically yet. I definitely see that in the very, very near future. And when we think about this from that lens of true population health, really wanting to be able to more effectively measure, the burden of disease, for lack of a better, descriptor, because we can put a lot of things under that disease.
Or the mixture of social determinants of health data with social economic data and, and then health data.
Correct.
From the individual level all the way up to, maybe potentially even survey data,
Yeah. And we're, definitely seeing that as that next phase. And there's more energy now than there's ever been before, obviously, because we really want to know more about those sort of social determinants of health, equity, all of these other factors that really are, at the end of the day, the influencers for whether or not we have a healthy population.
Right.
And so, yeah, 100%. I mean, let me start sort of at the left, so to speak, and we'll work to the right of this. I think one of the biggest changes that we see coming in the next couple of years was the declaration by the Center for Medicaid Services, CMS, that all electronic health record systems must have a FHIR API layer for HL7 FHIR API layer. That's really important. And the fact that they used shall as opposed to should or ought to, really means that this will happen, because, companies are motivated to keep receiving reimbursements at the same level they are, if not increased, as opposed to being penalized and receiving lower reimbursements. Exactly. And what this will do, though, is where historically, at least from this public health space, we've always had to reach out via so many different pathways to realistically the same data providers. So when we think about just healthcare, we care about chronic disease, we care about births, we care about so many aspects of things that occur in that health space, and we go about acquiring that data by different routes every time, and which creates incredible burden both on the public health providers as well as on the healthcare providers, because they're trying to reply to any number of continually evolving needs.
Right, and that sounds to be, I think, with the data modernization, is trying to coordinate and align some of those streams of data so that there aren't 30 different ways that the same data is sort of coming in to those disparate systems.
Precisely, and this next evolution of HL7 FHIR is really opening the door, because you're now creating one consolidated place to be able to acquire the data that you need to conduct your work. And it also exposes it even further, because that's intended as a two-way mechanism of communication.
Right, yeah.
So while historically public health has been a consumer of data, sometimes with the perception of it essentially being a black hole, we suck data in and not a lot comes out. We're really going to have that opportunity to consume data, analyze data, and then be able to provide it back to our contributors and stakeholders in a more effective manner, so that it can help them be more engaged in the population health improvement process. I think that this has been that awareness, in this public health 2.0, is that we can't do this alone. We really need the entire community engaged in the process. And the only way it's really going to be effectively done is to improve the ability of everyone to use that information when they need it and how they need it. So I'm super excited about that. And that's, again, just to the left, but we're going to keep moving forward. And as you said, Leslie, what about all these other factors that are going to allow us to paint that more complete picture? And that's that shift that's occurring as well. I know that we've had, and this has been highlighted by the pandemic as well, is that we've had to look to contractors or vendors to provide us certain insights, because we don't necessarily possess some of that information ourselves, or historically have not possessed that. And it's made our leadership step back a little and go, well, why don't we have this? Why do we have to look beyond our walls, when really a lot of these data aren't proprietary by any means? And so it's giving us the impetus to now start to plan for ensuring we have more comprehensive repositories of those various health information, or enrichment data that is going to help to make the health data we have more complete. And so we're really, we're looking at how we are better able to leverage, basically the world is migrating to APIs for virtually everything, and figuring out how we then move from the person dependent acquisition of data to the system, automation, so that we really always have what we need. And again, some of this has been historically constrained just due to other priorities, where now everyone's going, oh my gosh, we really, really need to do this, and we need to do this in a, in that sustainable manner.
Yeah, and I hate to say that the pandemic, I wish we didn't need the pandemic to kind of illuminate some of these things, but I think some of the acceleration definitely is attributed to wow, we really see it for what it is now, and we can prioritize our methods towards modernization and improving that interoperability of what we do have and what we need to have.
Yes, 100%. Yes, as you say, it's terrible to think that we had to rely on this, but unfortunately, this is how it has worked for a lot of years in public health. You wait for something horrible to happen, and then money falls out of the sky, and you're able to start to creep a little bit further
but it is
forward.
Encouraging. It's very encouraging to hear you say, let's slow down a little bit and let's be sort of strategic in how we emerge from, all of this, that we don't need to just, like you said, buy the shiny objects or the shiny systems or whatever, but really make sure that we are designing a system that's going to meet the needs of the future, not just right now or what we needed 5 years ago, but really what we need to have sustainably in place for the future. That's really important.
Yeah, and it's fortunate that perspective is being really seen and taken by kind of the entire of the hierarchy. Everyone's trying to now step back and go, okay, we recognize, and I'm still focusing a little bit just on the communicable disease side of it, because that's been the area that had the spotlight on it the most in this past year.
Sure.
The systems were designed for a purpose, and so the system that Virginia uses is a NEDS-based system. NEDS is the National Electronic Disease Surveillance System. So CDC set standards of what a surveillance system must be able to do in order to transmit that data to them as well for consolidation at the national level. That system was designed and built at the end of the 90s. And, Virginia's had implemented it originally, I think, in 2004. And so there's obviously been upgrades, but that architecture was based on what is now ancient technologies.
Right.
So, and at that time, it was reasonably well defined what surveillance constituted. And what the pandemic has done is it's really shown that it potentially needs to be something different than what it has been. A number of jurisdictions over the course of the pandemic really had to step away from their traditional approach to doing surveillance work and switch to alternate systems, just because they didn't provide the features, functions, and flexibility that were necessary for them to respond. Virginia at the time, it has been fairly fortunate and been able to stay with our system the whole way through, but we're just as aware that we need other features and functions that we just don't have. Interestingly, I was fortunate enough back in 2012 to be a part of a group that was put together by the Public Health Informatics Institute to help define the next generation of surveillance systems. And unfortunately, nothing really happened with that. But even within the past 2 months, we've had CDC coming to every state, and they're saying, tell us what you need. And they're using actually that guide from 2012 as kind of that next generation, because, and I heard this a lot very early on, and it was interesting because a lot of these questions came from students. They're like, well, why isn't there a system? Why is there such disparity between the various jurisdictions that cause it to be impossible to get the data in a consistent manner and in real time, quote unquote, and all of these things. And it really came down to that's because every state's been allowed to do whatever they want. And I think it's important to be flexible, but there's, a need for there to be, an advancement in standards, so to speak. So I think we're really going to see some big shifts there that will, also incorporate newer technologies. Some of the things that we did in this past year, just in Virginia alone, we've never done before. And that's because we as public health didn't really think that we could. We sort of thought it was like out of the appropriate use. And so you get put a little fire underneath, and all of a sudden you're willing to try things that you wouldn't necessarily have done before. And I think that what that's done is it's really going to open those doors for the future to allow us to just keep charging forward and engaging with the population, in ways that we have done.
I mean, I think you've described what Adrienne Marie Brown calls it emergent strategy. And, when you are able to create space, even in a crisis situation, to experiment and to problem solve and to, be inventive in a sense, on how you can make something better, faster, more effective. Those things are great teachers and motivators to keep going in the direction that you can go in, because now you've got some evidence behind you and some experience behind you to say, yeah, we can kind of push the envelope a little bit, and we can, kind of dream bigger here, and to creating systems that are more effective and useful. I think Melissa has one last question for you.
So what are some challenges as well as opportunities related to big data in population health? Not necessarily just the VDH, but in general.
Yeah, no, that again it's a great question, and I think that concept of big data is one that's really challenging, because we hear it everywhere, and people like to promote that big data has that potential to solve problems,
all the issues, right?
Yeah, and it is interesting, because the reality is that there's so many different definitions for what big data is, and I think big data for public health is radically different than big data for telecom or something like that. But it is important. I think what it means for us is ultimately more real-time type access to much broader data than we've had historically. And I think we've seen some interesting use cases occur again within this past year that are really helping us realize that the concepts that surround big data can be applied very effectively to what in reality is much smaller data, but it's going to increase functionality and usability of the data. One of the areas that I can express this with is that big data, the concept data lakes for Hadoop data lakes, however you want to call these things, really are just repositories for lots of similar and or disparate data. You're just really taking a lot of things and making them available in one common area, and giving people then that ability to interact with them as they need to develop insights that haven't existed previously. And I think that we in public health haven't necessarily been able to effectively visualize how that fits into our space, and the need we actually have to evolve to that type of utilization. So as the pandemic has really created more and more of the demands for additional data, we've seen it happen most effectively in the federal space in this past year, where there really has been a big emphasis on leveraging these cloud-based platforms for data lakes. So you're really just putting everything under the sun in these consolidated repositories, granting people access as appropriate via multiple mechanisms. That's sort of that next thought process as well, is like, I think for so long as the models have been, data is here, you can download it, and you can do something with it. You know, and switching that thinking to engaging with the data, as opposed to I need to have the literally pull it down and make it mine and
whole complete data set.
yeah, precisely. So, you know, I think those are those areas of big data that we're really going to benefit from as well. You know, and connecting it with my previous comment about APIs, being able to more dynamically just acquire what we need, bring them into our environments very rapidly, and then allow a much broader range of public health professionals also to engage with those data.
Right.
You know, and this is not a Virginia thing, this is public health as a whole, is that unfortunately there's been a lot of siloization over the years, a lot of which has been driven by funding. And I will say, at least from my perspective in Virginia, that I think we're really now finally starting to think differently, you know, because funding ultimately ends up impacting the ability to develop and configure your systems within your environment.
Right.
You know, funding based on how it's provided and the constraints that are put around it may force the development of these, you know, isolated systems that are not with no thought at all for interoperability. So we're now going, oh, maybe we need to not just be reactive to the funding opportunities. We need to look at those funding opportunities and ensure that they actually align with our strategic goals for creating this, you know, interoperable and integrated, you know, public health environment.
Yeah, it makes me think about like the Virginia, the VLDS longitudinal data system, you know, through SHEV and DOE and social services and criminal justice, juvenile justice, you know, DBH, all the agencies, you know, are coming on board with contributing data, you know, to this longitudinal system. I think, you know, when I was at VDH, you know, there was long conversations about even like the cancer registry data and like trying to think about, well, what are the risk factors? How do we start looking at this data from like a more preventive approach, you know, and seeing what other data kind of play into why certain areas have higher incidence of, you know, cancers. So
I think that longitudinal perspective is it. And I mean, 100%. I mean, I think we've fantasized about the ability to do that type of work within the public health space. And we're right there. We're now really, you know, moving from that wishing and desiring state to the implementing side of these things. And that's, you know, the integration of data is really what's going to allow us to be able to do that. You know, and so I'm very excited about this next phase for us because, you know, that's one of the other takeaways from the pandemic is that, you know, as a result of the demands, you know, we really had to pull workforce from many different program areas just to help meet the needs. And what you realize once that occurs and you allow people access to data that they historically would not have had access to, amazing new ideas just start percolating up. And folks are able to do incredible work, you know, filling gaps we didn't even necessarily realize we had. And so, you know, we sort of had that micro use case example with this, but I think as we continue forward and just expand this to the entirety of, you know, our public health space, you know, and create that access, we're going to really, you know, to your point, you know, being able with cancer to look at all those additional factors and include people from other program areas who may have incredible capabilities, but just never had the access to be able to engage in these, you know, these type of discussions or analyses.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that was a lot of information.